Uh, we have our pleasure. So first, thank you for the speakers before, and we have Professor Edwards from Newcastle University. Lilian Edwards is a leading academic in the field of internet law. We are now going back to the session of the policy for a really short visit of less than 10 minutes, but it will be a brief to give you the taste for next time. She's the editor and major author of law policy and internet, one of the leading textbooks in the field of internet law. She won the Future of Privacy Forum Award in 2019 for the best paper and the award for best non-technical paper at Facet in 2020, and she is a partner in the Horizon Digital Economy Hub in Nottingham, the lead for the Ellen Turing Institute on Law and AI, and the fellow of the Institute of Future of Work. So with that, this is our pleasure to catch you as the last speaker. So please, Professor Edwards, the stage is yours.
So I'm here to talk briefly about the draft or proposed EU artificial intelligence regulation, which is causing waves all over the world. This triangle, which I hope you can see, is the commonly known representation of this regulation, because what it does is it divides AI systems into different degrees of risk. At the top of the triangle are bans, those are the red lines, things that the EU is saying are not acceptable in our society. Underneath it is a tier of high-risk AI systems, which include things like policing systems, law enforcement systems, educational algorithmic proctoring, for example, automated hiring, public sector systems that work out whether you're entitled to welfare benefits, all these kind of really important systems. Underneath is a very kind of unimportant tier, which is a couple of systems where there are enhanced transparency regulations, obligations. And under that, we have minimal risk systems. Now, one of the things I want to say is that although that is the received vision of this, that is not really the important part. So to go back a little bit, the proposal came out a few months ago in April. We're expecting it to be a very large enterprise going through the EU. There are going to be several years of wrangling, I think, between various parts of the EU Commission, the Parliament, the various ministers, and industry. It's going to be a great deal of lobbying. And there is some debate that this will be the new GDPR, that it will be one of the most lobbied and controversial instruments that we've seen going through the EU. Part of the reason why it will be controversial is because, like the GDPR, it will be a balance between fundamental values, human rights, which have been part of a very big debate, obviously, about the deployment of AI in our society right now, but also between economic values, innovation. If we regulate AI too much, do we inhibit it? Do we cease to make money? Do we also inhibit social good? Okay. Now, if most people watching are in Israel, or even if they're in other parts of the world, you ask, why do I care? It's just an EU piece of legislation. Well, one reason you should care is because it is going to affect anyone putting AI systems onto market in the EU. In other words, anyone who wants to export AI, or indeed AI components of their services or products to the EU, is going to have to comply with it eventually. And that extraterritorial effect, like the GDPR, is going to be linked to a certain amount of supervision and fines. There can be big fines, up to 6% of global turnover. But the other, perhaps more important reason why people should care is that the aspiration is that this becomes a global standard. And so it kind of is a precursor to a battle that's been going on for a while as to who gets to regulate AI in the world and in what way. So on the one hand, you have the EU, who since about 2018 have been saying, we want AI to be trustworthy, we want it to be value-based, we want it to respect human rights. And on the other hand, you have, China, for example, that has lower standards of personal data privacy, lower standards perhaps on human rights, or less concern for it within the legal system. And you have an attraction there for developers because they can go there and pile up data, which is the basis of building AI systems. So which way is it going to jump? And third countries like now the UK, where I live, are finding themselves in the middle perhaps of this battle between, a highly innovative, highly economically driven AI governance regime and a more human rights, fundamental rights vision of AI governance. So this slide, I'm not going to go into, gives you a more detailed vision. You can get these slides off me if you want, of that triangle that I showed you. So on the left-hand side, you see some of that top red triangle of some of these banned systems. There is a very large debate going on there, particularly about biometric identification systems, so face recognition, gait recognition, that sort of thing. Many cities in America and other countries have now banned, to a less or more extent, the use of these systems by law enforcement. And there is going to be a battle about that, because right now there is a ban, but it's subject to many exceptions. In the middle, you see the meat, really, of the AI reg, which are these high-risk systems. So this is the next tier down. These are the ones that are, for example, these public sector systems, automated hiring systems, essential private services, credit scoring, risk scoring for prisoners, do I get out of jail, all these kind of things, migration systems. They're high risk, and they are subject to a really complex regime within the AI reg. So if I talk momentarily about that, it looks quite good from a European trustworthy AI perspective. The way that high-risk AI is to be certified is very much based on the way that right now products are certified as safe for consumers and citizens to interact with them in the EU. And this is done really by a set of requirements called essential requirements, which providers of the product, or in this case, the AI system, have to comply with. So we call these conformity requirements. And you have to certify as a provider of an AI system that you are conforming with these requirements. Now, it is a long list. And again, you can see that long list on the slide. There are two provisions there that I'll particularly highlight in this very brief moment I've got. One is data and data governance. Now that relates to what we commonly call training set data, also validation and testing data. And this is really the first time, I think, that there's been a really serious attempt to provide a technical mandate to say that if you are building AI, then your training set data has got to be, for example, relevant, representative, free of errors, and complete. There are really quite detailed requirements there about how you select your data, about how you consider if it's representative of the population. Is it discriminatory? Is it biased? Is it full of historic bias? How are you labeling your data? How are you cleaning your data? It's a really kind of serious attempt to control the technologies. And the other one I think that's particularly important and new is called human oversight. Now, this is the requirement that you provide your system, you design it and develop it in such a way that it can be effectively overseen by natural persons. So the idea here is that, say you are a big company, you provide, say you're HireVue, which is one I know about, that makes automated hiring systems for employers. HireVue sell it on to someone else, like a big company that deploys it. But HireVue themselves have got to think about how they build it in such a way that the guy working in the company can see that the system is going wrong. That is very new. They have to be able to reject things like automation bias, the belief that the system is always right, that computer is always right. They have to be able to understand when the input data they're putting in might make the system go in the wrong direction or behave in a discriminatory way. They have to be empowered to be able to say, no, I'm going to reject the output of the system and look for a different way to do this. That seems to me to be a very tall order for industry. But having said all that, I think the list of essential requirements that have to be certified is a good one and bears looking at for a great deal of scrutiny. The question is, will it make any difference to the AI market? Will it in fact either overregulate the AI market, or will it suddenly transform the AI market into one where fundamental values and human rights are protected? A lot of people think no. If you look at the second bullet point that I have there about enforcement, the problem is that because this is based on a product safety regime that has been going since the 1980s, if you dig into it, you find that it is primarily self-certification in a way that'll be very familiar to you, some of you coming from industry. Now, self-certification has advantages. Obviously, it's flexible, it can be quite cheap, it can be quite fast, but it can also be problematic. There's a lot of history in privacy law, for example, of self-certification by privacy seals, as with Safe Harbor in the US, being abused or not really very strongly enforced. Yeah. So the way in which this is going to be done is that the EU envisage technical standards being made by international standard setting bodies, and that you will then prove that you are in alignment with the rules of the AI regulation by saying, yeah, we've done a risk assessment, and we say that we are certifying ourselves as in conformity with this technical standard, right? Which will probably be developed by a couple of European technical standards bodies. Now that's problematic because those technical standards bodies live in a very kind of hermetic universe. You know, it's not a universe that is full of user representatives, of policymakers, of civil society, of the kind of NGOs that might represent human rights and civil interests. And no one is very sure how they're going to get a voice into the making of these standards. Another problem, as I've already alluded, is that self-certification is often not very much regulation, and that maybe third-party audit would be better, or some kind of top-down mandate, as with the Food and Drugs Authority in the US, the FDA. And another point is that we have other types of risk assessments out there, like human rights impact assessments and privacy impact assessments. And perhaps these should be combined with the risk assessment in the AI reg. So that's going to be one of the big debates. Another problem, again, is this all too technical? Do we think that AI is bad in some ways because the technology has been got wrong when we look at the scare stories about discrimination and, you know, and so forth? Or do we think that's about the political and economic context of deployment, the fact that AI systems are often put in the public sector to save money, you know, in the context of things like austerity, which we might see a lot of post-COVID? Can we regulate for that? Is it possible? By regulating the providers of the AI systems, are we able to successfully regulate the downstream uses by the deployers of AI, whether that's public authorities, local authorities, the state, or individual companies, right? So there's a lot in the AI reg about what you might call upstream regulation of the providers, but not very much about the downstream regulation of what the reg calls the users, by which it means the deployers, not the end users, the consumers or citizens. And talking of them, they have very little say in this because, again, it's aimed at product development. So it's aimed at these providers. So whereas when you look at privacy legislation and you look at a lot of civil rights kind of legislation, you find involvement places, you find public consultation, you find users being able to get a voice in, you find places where, say, civil society groups might be able to take representative actions, say, to the European Court of Justice. There is none of that in the AI regulation. It has very little voice for individual complaint or individual involvement from users. And so that really leads you, having said all these things that are currently wrong with the AI reg, despite the fact that lots of it is really a good start, I would say, to ask, is this the global standard we want? Because it's very likely to become a de facto global standard, at least among the kind of Western democratic world and possibly also the global South. So this is really the time for people everywhere to start investigating this. And I'll stop there.
Mm-hmm. Great. Professor Edwards, this is really impressive to kind of give a concise presentation of this so complicated but important topic. We are all rushed to the AI and other technologies, and we definitely feel that the policy part of it should also catch the technology race. Unfortunately, we cannot allow more time for this discussion or for taking questions from the audience. So thank you so much, and I'm happy that we've succeeded to catch up and to add this session also to our conference. So thank you very much. And this is the time to thank all our participants. Look what a journey we had here this evening, afternoon, morning in North America. We had a great session, starting with the policy, going into the deep crypto technological discussions, and then continue to the AI, IoT, and concluding with the policy that goes with the technology. I think this is a great example for our interdisciplinary perspective and the way that we really run in our center these things, and combining so many domains and so nice variety of academic leaders and talents within the center. And what we do, we meet every year within our conference here. And this is a great pleasure to be here this time with you, this time virtual. I hope next time in person with all this our community, and to be here together and to run this conference. So thank you very much for the speakers, for the audience, for the organizers of this conference, for Dania, who led all this effort, for Gili, Revital, and all the others leaders of the conference. So thank you so much, and wish you the entire few hours of the conference to have it as a very inspiring and interesting session. So thank you, and see you next year. Bye-bye.